But I was thinking last night, every now and then you get these kind of epiphanies, right? It's just like, oh, yeah. And what stimulated this was a news story. In fact, I saw it, and then this morning, Sean, our executive producer, emailed it to me just a few minutes ago. Said, "Did you see this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's our Matthew, little Matthew Heimbach. He's 25 years old. It's been probably a year since he's been on our program. Used to be based out of Washington D.C. His parents live near here, and I'm guessing he used to live with his parents. He's, kind of a unassuming, pudgy little white guy. I don't know how to describe him beyond that. Apparently he's grown a beard now. But he just seemed like your kind of average kid, 20, 22, 23, 24, first time we had him on the air. But he would come on the program. We had him on the TV program more than here on radio because I don't do so many guests here on radio. But he came on and just came right out and said that he believed that the white race was the superior race and that, just the whole David Duke shtick. And, here's this article now that's over at Huffington Post about this woman this reporter who took a deep dive into Trump land and discovered Matthew. And they described him as the new David Duke. So that's what started my thinking, but follow along with me. So I'm thinking, okay, Matthew, when he first came on our program, people laughed at him. The Twitter ridiculed him, all this kind of stuff. But they're not laughing anymore. People, this white supremacist movement that has found a home in the Trump campaign and in the Republican Party, that has always had a home in the Republican Party, but the rule of the game was, you're welcome here. This was Nixon's Southern strategy, right, to the white racists after LBJ signed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Basically Nixon's sales pitch to what used to be the Democratic racists, white racists in the South, was, you're welcome in the party. We've got a place for you. Our Southern strategy is all about making sure that your agenda is taken care of, but we're not going to talk about it out loud. We're going to talk about it in code. And Donald Trump and many of his surrogates have kind of blown that up, which is, the original sin against the Republican Party that had anyway. Now they're all coming home to Donald. A number of Republicans kind of quite upset about all this. But the thought that I had, and I'm building up to this. I probably should have started with it, and then as I recommended yesterday to callers, the thought that I had is that when racism, and I'm talking about racism in a big way. I'm talking about racial hygiene, racial theory, eugenics, not just Jim Crow, but even beyond that, separate but equal, apartheid. When the people who espouse racism are considered smart, your country's in trouble. And when the people who espouse racism are considered stupid, you've got some hope. And there's a cycle to this. Woodrow Wilson, the Democratic president, during World War I, and, there's all this, take his name off the university and all this stuff that he was the president of, because he openly advocated the idea that we should have separate but equal in the United States because of the inferiority of the black race, in his kind of language. So there was in the 1920s in the United States, it was not just acceptable to promote racist theory. It was conventional wisdom. We created this entire program along with the British called eugenics. where we were sterilizing people because they were inferior stock. Now, this was not just limited to race. You know, it was also to people who were mentally infirm, things like that, or born with birth defects and things like this. And Hitler picked this up and actually used American eugenics posters from the 1920s in his campaigns in the 1930s to promote racial hygiene and racial purity in Germany. See, that's where it goes when the racists are considered by society as a whole to be the smart guys. Now, you know, so you know, we saw what happened with Hitler. And after World War II, even the quote thoughtful racists, like, you know, the guys who wrote the bell curve kind of thing, you know, and books like that, suggesting that there is a racial difference in intelligence. And, you know, the book has been thoroughly debunked. But, you know, this was, you know, from the Reagan era forward, there have been these attempts to try to legitimize racism. But they get slapped down pretty quickly in the United States. But now you've got Donald Trump, you've got the Republican Party, you've got the whole Breitbart sphere, you've got the alt-right, you've got the rise of the white supremacist movement in the United States. And they're starting to gain allies. And they're starting to gain, and they're developing their own intelligentsia. Now, this is so far largely confined to the fringe of the Republican Party and the far right, but it has, as a consequence, I would suggest, in large part of the Trump candidacy. Although I don't think that this is entirely Donald Trump. I think this is something that's been bubbling for some time. But that it is coming back around. That racism is becoming more acceptable in our society. And the idea of racial differences and the idea of racial purity and the idea of, you know, race, you know, this isn't the America that we knew, right? I mean, you know what the subtext to that is. And there's all these, you know, these Trump ads and Trump groups and Trump himself, you know, some of the things that he says. That, you know, make America great again. Is that code for make America white again? I mean, what else is it? America wasn't great in the 1960s and 50s for people of color. It was great for white men. In 1950, if you were a white man in the workplace, you could grab your female coworker's butt and not worry about suffering repercussions of it. You could refuse to hire somebody or to rent to somebody who was, you know, of a different race and not worry about any, you know, if you were white and male, and not worry about it. So, you know, if Trump is talking about, let's take us back to that wonderful era, he's talking to white people. Because right now, and you know, and in fact, you know, it's almost projection. He's like, oh, and black people live in ghettos and their lives are hell. And, you know, what do you have to lose? And, you know, you got no jobs. And it's not quite the black experience anymore. I mean, yes, there are pockets of poverty and violence, you know, in the black community. There are in the white community, too. But things are not, for at least from what I know of it, and obviously, you know, I have my own colored glasses that I'm looking through, as it were, because I'm a white man, and I don't, you know, I can try to understand the experience of a person of color in this country, but I've not lived it. Right? I have to observe it and try to empathize it. But I think that this whole Trump thing, this whole, you know, make America white again thing, this whole, you know, I think the thing that concerns me about this is that we're swinging back into that old cycle You know, when Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, he was considered one of the smartest guys in the room, and he believed in the superiority of the white race. Racism was acceptable at the founding of this country. In fact, he ran a concentration camp based on that theory. And he wasn't the only one. George Washington ran a concentration camp. James Madison ran a concentration camp. They called them plantations, based on racial theory. So we had that. And then in the 1860s, there was a challenge to that. And it lasted maybe 15, 20 years. And then Reconstruction kind of fell apart, and the racial theory came back, and we hit Plessy. And I mean, you know, most of the history of the United States has been that the racists were considered the smartest guys in the room. The Roger Taney, who was the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court in 1856, and Dred Scott, saying, I'm going to solve this problem once and for all. We'll just simply say black people are property. I mean, not just the smartest guy in the room, the most powerful man in America, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, or one of the most powerful. So what, and I don't have a solution to this. I mean, this is just kind of a starting point for thought and for discussion. I mean, if you have some thoughts on it, I'd love to hear them. But what happens in this country if that kind of thinking comes back around again? I mean, it's here. But if it actually starts gaining purchase and power, what happens if Donald Trump gets elected president and puts those kind of people into office, into his cabinet, into education positions?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Where do we go with that?